It is my pleasure to have a great guest on today. Uh, Tim Hale is the nephew of Cynthia Hughes, and Cynthia started Patriot Freedom Project. And I guess, is it safe to say, Tim, that you were one of the reasons she started this?
I think that's safe to say. Yeah,
Now,
go ahead.
I've been wanting to have you on for a long time, and there's several others, I guess you could say, in the pipeline because you hear so many people talking about Jan 6 people and people stuck in prisons and people serving and trumped up charges and bail denied. And this is why I'm thrilled for to have you on and for my audience because Tim has spent more than a decade in the military, both in the Army and then as a Navy contractor. He's from New Jersey, and not only was he denied bail, but he served 3 years. So tell us the story. Let's go back as far as you'd like to go back. I just wanted to set the stage, and again, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I definitely appreciate the time you've given me. So, as you said, I served my country for over a decade. My entire adult life I dedicated to public service. On the contractor side, I was also a union rep, so I actually was responsible for other contractors as well. This will play into the story a little bit later, but it's important for people to understand um, a lot of January 6th defendants were smeared or misrepresented as being either radicals, extreme, or partisan troglodytes. And the truth is that I've always been an independent person. So I was a hardcore Trump supporter, but I was also a union guy. I was from New Jersey, which is I'm glad to say, more of a battleground than people realized before.
Hmm.
But I always considered myself to be an independent, not a Republican partisan, but an independent. In fact, I always found the Republicans to be extremely uh, short of effective in local politics here in New Jersey. So I never put much stock in the parties. But
Hmm.
Trump definitely appealed to me. So I definitely believe that the 2020 election was rigged. I still believe it was. And
As do
so,
I. Yep.
as I think most Americans, if they didn't before, I think they know now. But
The trick
and
is we need to get them not to be so frightened of saying it. That's the problem.
I mean, that's true. The problem, people have a normalcy bias, and because of the customs and, the mores of society, people don't want to say things that they know are true, but that they feel as though they're going to stick their neck out to be chopped off. That's just unfortunately the nature of society, and especially unfortunately, and this is going to come into play. We're in an age where people are proud of turning in their loved ones. So with January 6th really revealed how partisan and like how divided politically the country's become. Like I was turned in by my roommate, and we'll get to that. But I would, one man I was locked up with. He was turned in by his son. Another
Gee.
man, another man who I wasn't locked up with in the DC Gulag. He was turned in by his coworker that he drove to work every day. Um, People who coworkers, friends, family, neighbors, people were turned in by those they trusted. And so we're at a point where people are so viscerally disgusted by political opposition, and it's easy for us to say it's just one direction. I think it is more so, but all the same, that's not a good precedent. It's not a good state for society where you have to worry about whether a third of the population wants to set you up and turn you into the feds. It's like we're living in Tsarist Russia or something like that. It's like we're
It's
living.
exactly what it is. And I remember being on a show, one of my last radio stations that I was on. We were live January 6th, and I told people that were heading from central Pennsylvania, because that's where I'm still living in Pennsylvania now. I said, I want you to call me when you get there or call me when you get a signal and give me an update. And I started getting calls about stuff that was just really screwy, like people changing clothes and people coming in a van load, but they didn't have any ID and identifying marks or anything. And then I was getting calls on my show about just people that trust me and I trust them. And they say, dude, this place is crawling with feds. We don't even know the people in the the people in our group, we don't even know. Some of these people were never in our group before. Who are these people? And I started to realize this, something's not right. And then, of course, you know the history better than anyone. But I remember within a week, my governor at the time, Tom Wolf, who's not as big as a scumbag as Josh Shapiro, my current governor,
All right.
but I remember the billboards going up all around central PA and the Lehigh Valley and outside of Pittsburgh. If you have any information on anyone that was at January 6th, call this toll-free number. Love the FBI.
Yeah.
And that's like East Germany before the wall. That's what that was. If you have information, then you call us and you'll be rewarded. You'll be
I
rewarded.
I know nothing. It's funny you say that. I actually was going to bring up at the start of this, I was going to bring up that Governor Phil Murphy, on the drive back, I'm watching him giving like easy saying, "Oh, if you were anywhere near there, we're going to hunt you down or you're going to be punished to the fullest extent of the law." I'm like, oh, and then this is on the drive back from DC to New Jersey. I'm like, that scumbag. I bet he's talking about me. And then, but also, it's funny. Like they laid the groundwork for this with COVID because Phil Murphy also, much like
Well,
Tim Walz, he had those snitch hotlines.
you and I are on the same wavelength as you were telling that story. All I could think of was when it was on ABC News out of Philadelphia, and Murphy had sent the National Guard. I don't know if you remember that, and they set up a perimeter around an area that was quarantined in New Jersey.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's that same guy. And no one covers this because most people in media, as you know, they're either lazy or gutless, or they don't, there's not enough momentum and they just know that, if I tell the truth, I'm going to get in trouble. But you came from a state that already, we call it communist over here because I'm 40 miles from the border of your state. So tell us how you ended up at Jan 6. You've kind of laid it out already, how you feel. And I agree with the millions of people that uh, know that the election was stolen. You show up there. How on earth did you end up in prison for 3 years? What did they charge you with? What did you allegedly do?
Well, first off, I just want to say I'm a proud resident of the People's Republic of Jersey.
That's what it
Uh,
is.
yeah, I mean, this new governor's race, I'm keeping eyes on some people, but they're trying to put they're trying to put Bramnick back in there. He's horrible, but I digress. So I was a history major, and so I had been to the inauguration in 2017. I'd seen, that was kind of that seemed more like an insurrection than what I experienced in 2021. But I was trying to get more involved in politics and stuff like that, go to different, rallies and protests and
Mhm.
stuff. So look, from my perspective, and I think this is important for people to understand, is that a lot of people just went there to hear a speech. Like I literally didn't know there was going to be a protest at the Capitol until I had heard it when I was at the Ellipse.
And you're talking about Jan 6.
Yes. So
Yes.
I had gone to Washington, D.C. just to hear Trump speak because I thought it was either going to be it was going to be his last public speech as president, right? And because his term was going to end, or the second alternative is that he was going to pull a rabbit out of his hat, and this would actually be the start of his second term. So either way, I thought this was going to be an historic day, and it turned out it was just not in the way I had expected.
Right, right.
I had, as I worked as a contractor, I worked overnights. And so when I got off my overnight shift early in the morning, I went home, I threw on my suit and tie. Um, I actually went out to Men's Warehouse the night before my shift started so I could get new dress shoes. They hurt like hell. So I'm driving to DC after I'm blasting down the road for 4 hours. I'm drinking Bang Energy just so I don't, pass out on the road. Blasting metal. I get to DC. There's no parking. I'm wandering around. I think I parked in front of a McDonald's that I wasn't like. Honestly, I don't even know if I was allowed to park there. Like everything was blocked off. So I'm wandering around. I have like a spare like charger for my phone because it's like the GPS as I wander around is murdering my battery.
Right,
And
right.
I'm like, I'm gonna be late. I'm gonna be late. I'm gonna miss this speech. Fortunately, I got to, hear Trump's speech at the Ellipse, which for those who don't know is the area in front of the Washington Monument and in front of the White House area. Huge lawn, thousands and thousands of people. So I'm listening to the speech, and I mean, and that's how I got to DC in the first place. I was just there expecting to hear a speech. I try to
Mhm.
look as presentable as possible as a citizen. And you start to see some interesting things though when you look at the video that I took. And this is part of the reason that they are withholding the thousands of hours of video from the CCTV, a lot of the body cameras from the Metro PD.
Yeah,
They don't want.
thanks for nothing, Mike Johnson.
Well, yeah, that's a real shame because like a lot of that is very valuable. Some of it has been released, but not enough. They actually started prioritizing some of the video from the fifth instead of the sixth. It's like, were you going to release the other half of these cameras? They started blurring people's faces in the CCTV. I'm like, well, that's curious because obviously the FBI already has this video. You're not really protecting protesters. Why are you blurring people's faces now? That seems a little suspicious, like they were protecting maybe assets in the crowd. I don't
Right.
know. But when you look at the video on my cell phone, and we can bounce through the timeline here, but it's just important people are understanding. I'm recording, and one of my first clips from the Ellipse, someone next to me is saying there's some sort of a march going on. So people were leaving the Ellipse before Trump's speech was even over. Some
Hmm.
people never even attended his speech. They went straight to the Capitol, and started knocking barriers over. So it's important people to understand there's an interesting timeline here. People like myself wandered onto the Capitol grounds a half hour before people like Ray Epps and others knocked barriers over. We didn't know that happened. So when we went to peacefully and patriotically protest, we didn't know there were restricted grounds. We just wandered into an area and an ocean of people poured into there because signs were torn down that said restricted area. You had fencing that was torn down, rolled up, and thrown aside. You had people, they call him the scaffold commander, who was on top of, they call it the media tower, on a bullhorn directing people where to go.
Is he one of the people that shot a gun off
No, but I believe there was one person who fired a firearm.
on a scaffold?
Yes, that man's name is John Banuelos. He was identified by the feds for 3 years before they picked him up. He was known to the feds. He was actually known by law enforcement because he was actually involved in a stabbing murder out in Utah, and they ignored him. It was only until another J6 defendant, Derek Evans, who ran for office in West Virginia, he pointed this out. He found video. He's like, "Is this guy a Fed?" And then suddenly he got charged. But he's the only
Yep.
one who fired a firearm. He did it
Yes.
in the air, but it's
Yep.
interesting
It
that
was
these
I think it was a 45. It looked like a 1911 A1.
it's an armed insurrection, quote unquote.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
wouldn't prioritize picking up the guy who actually fired a firearm. Meanwhile, there's a guy I was locked up with. His name is Guy Reffitt. He allegedly had a firearm in a holster that was on his back, that he never brandished. He got 7 years. There's another fella who accidentally lost his gun. It was a loaded firearm in a holster that was left on the ground. That's called a drop gun. That guy got probation, even though someone could have picked that gun up and shot someone. So it's very interesting how they play the armed insurrection narrative. For people who aren't aware, there were some people who had firearms, but it's very weird how they approach the situation. Guy Reffick gets 7 years for a firearm he never brandishes. People who actually fired rounds or people who left guns out for anybody to use, nothing really for 3 years.
So who this is now I knew about some of the I knew about the finding of a gun or two, or at least I heard from my research. And I actually saw the video of, I'm sure this surprised a lot of people. I may have played it on this show a year or two ago, but I played that video of the scaffold man shooting and it changed the whole dynamic because it's the difference now on the radio you could say shots fired, there's the narrative. And what you said earlier before arriving, I don't think people realize how big the capital area is. You could actually have three or four points of entry that are staged where they, as you know, in some cases they reduce the guard. People were on vacation. They were given the day off. Some of them. You had points of entry that should have had 4 or 5 guards, and they had two, and yet they were strangely being videotaped. Look at this
Right.
crowd going by the. But then there were other parts of the Capitol where you may have heard something, but like you said, you didn't even see anything, and
Well,
it
this
makes sense that they would set a trap and then
when you
just throw a net over everybody.
Yeah, when you look at the video, like again, I always make a point of this. Like the first thing I did when I got out of prison was release the video from my phone. I don't know why more defendants don't do that. I have ideas why, but you could see that there's an ocean of people. You can't even see the front of the crowd. You can't see any skirmishes with cops. We're singing God Bless America. We're chanting USA. We're saying Christ is King, stuff like that. It just seems like it's a jolly old time. After a certain period of time, it starts to escalate into a riot because there are provocateurs and agitators at the front
Yes.
of the crowd. What you had said is important because beyond just personal phone, I studied a lot of video. I watched a lot of CCTV stuff that's not available to the public because I was able to get access to the government's evidence systems, even though they didn't want me to. And if you watch the CCTV, you can see the cameras following the Proud Boys the whole morning as they march around Washington, D.C. What happened at the Capitol breach site, I do think that there were I know some of the people who were involved in the first perimeter breach. I'll say that. Some of them are suspicious. Some of them I think were patsies and good people. So, but I want people to understand there's no way in hell that that breach was a surprise. They were following them the entire morning. There were actually police motorcades that helped the Proud Boys cross the street. I have what video of them giving them an escort across the street. They allowed that to happen. And like you said, yeah, there were like 4 cops guarding the initial breach site where Ray Epps and some of the Proud Boys and some other suspicious characters first knocked those first barriers
Hmm.
over. And then they just retreated. And like half of them, not for nothing, like half these cops are women. Like this is not a force that's meant to protect the Capitol. I don't
Oh,
believe that.
exactly. I mean, that to me was, well, most of us have heard, about the National Guard, and no one wanted to allow the National Guard there. And apparently Trump said, get the National Guard there, and then we don't have to worry about anything. Just
Yeah,
get it locked down because people are going to show up and they're going to, want to protest or whatever they're going to do. And no one wanted to play along with that. I think they wanted the conditions ripe for a false flag. They wanted it ripe. So
uh,
and the video is so tainted. And that's why I don't think the Republicans or the Democrats, the leadership, wants to release it because it's so plain how quickly. Now, you probably know this better than anybody, and then I want to get into the whole unsavory prison thing, but you probably know better than anybody that that first week that they did start teasing us with releasing some of the video, there were people exonerated like within hours.
yeah. I mean that just goes to show you that there's different like that, again, I think there are different reasons for why they don't want to release it. One, I think it would exonerate a lot of people
Yes.
of their specific crimes. Two, it would undermine the narrative, and I can get into why that is, but basically those of us who were inside the Capitol building, we there was like no violence inside the building, which is actually strange because you'd think an insurrection would get worse once we made it into the building. It's actually the
Yep.
exact opposite. The violence on the outside was between skirmishes between people fighting the cops because of excessive force from the cops. And then the third thing is that again, I think that they're protecting feds, and I don't think they want to release all the video because it would show that there are agent provocateurs in the crowd, or it could actually show video of undercover assets. We've identified FBI agents in the crowds in plain clothes. So, and there were DIA assets there, Defense Intelligence Agency
And
assets.
that's scary. It's scary that the DIA is there because
Yeah,
they can't keep our border secure and they kind of dropped the ball with 9/11. Oops.
yeah.
But
I don't exaggerate.
they're at our protest.
Every three-letter agency. I mean, there were. I mean, we know that even from reports they've released, they're not even hiding it. There were CIA assets deployed there. You had police canine teams there that were undercover. It's funny, like there's a defendant named Will Pope. He found CCTV of a woman uh, rolling around an empty stroller with a canine unit is strapped to her. It's just like, is Fido? a police dog by chance? But
Or is it just a woke dog?
yeah, he identifies as a baby. He needs a stroller for that. But like, but that's yeah. I mean, unfortunately, like yeah, there's a lot of evidence that's being withheld, and there are so many different angles we could go through this. But yeah, I mean, dude, there's no doubt in my mind that you had elements within the Democratic leadership, and frankly, I think there were Republicans who were in on it too because they
Oh,
wanted
I
to.
couldn't agree more with you on that. I think it was a joint. That's one thing the Republicans and the Democrat leadership can always agree on: how to cover their own asses.
And how to screw President Trump over.
Exactly. And they,
There's video. We have body cam footage now from Metro PD, and there's officers who get brought in as backup, as support. They're like, they should have called us hours ago. They set us up. They set
yep,
us up. They're like, absolutely, they set us up. And the question is like, well, who set them up? Because the Metro PD answered to Mayor Bowser, who turned down National Guard support.
yes,
The Capitol PD answered to Nancy Pelosi,
who
who turned down
also
National Guard
turned
support.
down,
Right.
yeah,
And now, of course, I'm sure you saw this too. A couple months ago, there was also a video that came out of Pelosi admitting that she was responsible for J6er.
yes.
She's like,
And
"This is
here's
my fault."
the one there's so many. I'm just so grateful that you agreed to come on because it's so important that this gets out. And I'm like a dog with a bone. Everybody has told me all the topics I should stay away from if I want to get back into radio. They've said, look, stop with the COVID stuff. And I say, I'm never going to stop with the COVID stuff. It's ineffective and dangerous. It wasn't safe and it was ineffective. I'm not stopping because it killed some of my listeners. And, put the 2020 election behind you. No, I'm not, because it was a coup. It was a soft coup.
The color
And
revolution.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that is our specialty in America. We do that all over the world. And put January 6th behind you. And it's like, my listeners are, I'm sure they're tired of hearing it, but they know I'm like a dog on the bone. They know that there's like one or two people left that's trying to keep this in the public eye. What you just said about the violence being on the exterior and not the interior, that is so important, and it's something so many of us noticed
Hmm.
because if it was a real insurrection, first of all, if it was an armed insurrection, well, it would have been insurrected. I
You
mean,
think? I
yeah, I
mean,
mean, it's just it was way too easy. It was designed to be easy. To me, they just rounded up patsies. I mean, when you're putting grandma's wandering around and taking pictures, and I have video of people high five. I also have video of some people that were there too, and I had one particular source of mine, and God bless them. I'm going to say they were so worried because of what was happening to people like you and others. We met at a neutral place. I mean, it was right out of a movie for me to see and get this video that they had, and the video that they showed me, which I can attest to, a bunch of people singing, swaying back and forth with the flags and all this stuff, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and Capitol Police shooting them with paintball guns in the face. And all of a sudden, people are getting jacked up. And they told me, you can't say where you got this. You can't. I said, I promised them if they talk to me, I could share like the conversation I'm having now, but I promised never a name, and I will never publish this,
yeah.
which I've stood by. I'm not going to do that. But this is the level of fear and intensity. But the comments I got and still get from people like yourself, every day a new truth comes out, and the media is just so useless. And all these politicians that talk about the Constitution and what they're going to do. And, you just served 3 years in prison. You got out, you said about a year ago, you got out.
Little under, yeah.
I can't even imagine that. I can't even put that. And it's funny, you mentioned the inauguration. I was at the inauguration in 2017, and it was it was a real treat watching the limousines burn and watching people that hate Trump and hate me and hate my country break windows out of stores.
That happened right by me. I was I was with my buddy. We had just gone down there. We were going to see the parade. We walked by this storefront. I don't know if it was, I think it was a coffee shop or it was a bank. I think it was like a
It was, I
Starbucks.
think it was a Starbucks. It
Yeah, I walked
was a
right by
Starbucks.
it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want a coffee, but I don't want to miss the parade. I walk by it. Minutes later, I'm getting messages like, "Hey, you okay?" Why? I pull up a live stream on Facebook. They're breaking into that Starbucks. I'm like, "Holy crap!" You know, you had people with all these pre-made signs and stuff. People coming in through the trains and the from the like it was cl so AstroTurf. The
Yeah.
opposition who came in, there was like pink and purple hair for miles. I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh
And
crap!
that
I
was
thought
just on
it
that
was
was just on the men.
great. Yeah, like
All the
this.
men. Remember the pussy hats that all the men wore?
Yeah,
It said,
yeah.
"I'm a feminist."
Like I'm like
No, you're a
this ain't
wuss bag. You're a
this
wuss.
ain't
You're not a
this ain't the
feminist.
this ain't the parade I came for. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know what you guys are here for, but yeah, it was. That was crazy.
I
That
was in
was
a diner. I was in a diner about 3 blocks from that. I circled round where you were. I was not at the Starbucks scene when things started to break. And I'm sitting at the diner and all the TV screens are on. And then the woman, she goes, "Oh, that's right. That's like a block over from us." So I go outside in the diner. I'm having my coffee and I'm having like a sub or something.
yeah.
And I could see the smoke from the limousine coming up, and I'm like, "Wow, this is going to be an exciting administration." And they all most of them walked. It's just
Yeah.
like the BLMers walk, the Antifa walks, Occupy Wall Street, the rapists and the drug dealers, they walk, and then uh, you end up getting. I think I'm using your quote here, a cocktail of misdemeanors, right?
Right.
That's how they stacked all this up. And you were denied bail. I don't know why you would be denied bail if it wasn't violent and you weren't a imminent threat to the community.
So here's an interesting thing, and this is a lot, and so people need to realize like just how like I'm a conservative, I'm not a libertarian, so I like, but I understand the appeal of small government. There are so many laws on the books that people don't even know about. Some of the laws a lot of the laws we got hit with are things that are like, so for instance, I ended up getting one felony charge, and it's a felony charge that the Supreme Court just overruled a few months ago. So this is how they were able to give me time. It was called obstruction of an official proceeding.
Oh, I remember that crap.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's because of an Enron. That's because of the Enron scandal, where they created a substatute to a tampering with informants statute. So there's a statute from the 80s that's about tampering with witnesses, and then there's a substatute that was added in 2003 after Enron called obstruction of an official proceeding. And the concept here is that you're obstructing an investigation similar to how you would obstruct a witness. That's why it's a substatute to that, and it had to do with destroying documents. It had nothing to do with interfering with, like again, the certification vote. But because in the clause it said whosoever interrupts a joint hearing of the House and Senate, blah 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 blah, up to 20 years. Whoa! So that's something that they were using to give people exorbitant sentences. So even though, yeah, without that charge, the max I could do was a year because that's how misdemeanors work. Everybody got, for the most part, people got concurrent sentences, not consecutive. So what they did
And
was,
explain that. I know what that means, but explain that to people who have never heard the
sure.
difference between stacking it up and one
Yeah.
time, right?
So consecutive sentences are when you have multiple charges and you serve the time for one, and then you serve the time for the next charge. Typically, though, consecutive sentences don't happen, at least not at the federal level like that. You get concurrent, which means you add all the charges together and whatever the longest sentence is possible for the worst charge, typically that's what you serve your time on. And so you're serving the time for all those charges at the same time. And so for someone like myself, if you just had misdemeanors absent this fake felony that just got overturned, then the max you could do is a year because misdemeanors only take you up to a year. Most of the misdemeanors people got charged with were either 6 months max or a year max. And that's the misdemeanor cocktail. So it'd be like
And they were
trespassing,
right.
picketing, like literally picketing.
Non-violent though, non-violent misdemeanors,
Right.
right? All non-violent.
And there were nonviolent charges that were felonies, like the obstruction thing, that again are just anachronistic things that were just misapplied. That statute has never been applied to protesters or even rioters. It's never been applied like that. It has to
Well,
do
what
with
they should have done
conduct.
is applied it to Hillary Clinton. because she
Or
actually did
or
destroy.
the congressman who pulled the fire alarm and obstructed the hearings in Congress, right?
Yes,
That nothing
yes,
happened, to him.
yeah.
And this is the thing. There's another one. It's called civil disorder. This is a maximum of 5 years, but
My
it
God.
has to do with taking part in a I mean the idea is to be anti-riot. It's whosoever is a part of an assembly of three or more people engaged in violence. Well, here's the thing. If you're just in an area with other people, that could apply to you depending on how you read it. But
Hmm.
again, this statute goes back to the Civil Obedience Act of the 1960s. This was a way to keep Martin Luther
Right.
King and civil rights protesters from protesting in DC. It was a way to punish people who oppose segregation. People don't realize how these old statutes that had no place even still being on the books were weaponized. Then you had things like seditious conspiracy. You talked about people infiltrating groups that weren't really part of people's groups and stuff. That happened with the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. I was locked up with them. There were a lot of informants inside those groups
Yeah.
who set people up, testified against them, came out of nowhere, started like trying to trip them up with chat apps.
Yes.
Um, the number two of the Oath Keepers. I was friends with the Oath Keepers in jail. The number two, like the vice president, I guess, of that group, directly under Stuart Rhodes, I guess, he was a FBI informant. He was feeding information to them. The Proud Boys, if you look at the filings, there were dozens of informants inside the Proud Boys. And so this is why I said earlier about the initial breach. A lot of the Proud Boys were good people that were turned into patsies. There were a lot of people who really set them up. And people need to understand. And this is why I don't join groups and this is why I encourage people not to. I don't have like don't like I always say you have the right to do anything, but you
True.
got to understand it's an unfortunate reality. Like I said, we live in a time where people want to entrap a third of the population wants to entrap another third, and the other third is just like completely has no idea what's even going on.
Right. And
We,
or
we
they're
just live in that time.
they've been programmed to believe, like, if you just look now at it's funny. I told you I'm doing a feature this week on Syria. And you know, one decade we're creating ISIS and paying for it, just like one decade we were Osama bin Laden was on our payroll. And then the next decade, everything flips around. One decade, Israel's paying, they're actually siphoning money to certain terrorists to help their cause, right? And that's every government does that. They set
Manuel Noriega, the
up.
Mujahideen. It's like
Yes, yeah. And Cuba, look at Cuba.
rent a dictator. It's fucking yeah. It's pretty much what it is. And like, yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of like the we pretty much replaced the British Empire on the world stage. Well, you know that you got Quigley behind you there. I see that.
Yep, yep. I
You
mean,
know,
the Brits are the what
it's
do
the
we got?
great game. That's what it is. It's the great game on the world
Yeah,
stage.
yeah. We're still answering to the Brits, and probably 20% of the British Parliament are still pissed off over 1776. I would imagine they still have a chip on their shoulder about that.
I'm pissed off at their royalty always being in my news. I don't.
Yeah. Oh wow. Now, before we get into the transition, and for people just tuning in, we're talking to an amazing guest today, and Patriot Tim Hale. His aunt founded Patriot Freedom Project, where they help comfort the families and try to support and defend so many of the wrongly accused or the victims of lawfare in January 6th, because that is the new currency of, I would say, totalitarianism in this country for sure. That's the new currency. We'll just bleed you dry legally, or we'll just make up some stuff. We'll make it up, and we won't let you speak on your behalf. And which brings me to the Governor Whitmer kidnapping fraud case. And that's something that I was so angry, especially with some of my fellow folks in media, because they wouldn't cover it. And when they did cover it, they bought into the lie. And I said, those guys were patsies. They were duped.
Yeah.
They were duped. You could go to any gun club today and take fragments of conversations and set people up with gifts that they wanted or they didn't. And they were duped. There were several FBI people working that. And for people who don't know, we're talking about the group of people that allegedly were going to go and kill kidnap Governor Whitmer and wanted to kill government officials. They never said any of that. It never was said. They have no tape of it. There's no tape of it. The guy that was getting all this fake evidence, he said, well, the tape wasn't working that day. So you basically took a bunch of Americans and lied and destroyed their lives and labeled them forever, just like, you're supposedly an armed insurrectionist, which is bullcrap.
Right. Yeah, the so that dealt with the Wolverine Watchmen. That's
Yes.
the extremist militia, the Wolverine Watchmen, which by the way, I know that's supposed to I guess it's a reference to Wolverines from Red Dawn, probably,
Wolverines.
but that's just such a hilarious name. Like
It
I
is.
could
It
never take
is
that
cheesy.
seriously.
It is
But
too cheesy.
I've talked to some of those guys that were set up, and it's like I know someone, a woman who's made a documentary about them, and it's crazy how it really seems like this was sort of like a blueprint for January 6th because
Yes.
one of the lead guys for the feds over there, he got promoted out of that office, that field office, to DC right
It was
before.
a beta test.
Right. And there are things like PatCon and all these programs. I'm sure you know about COINTELPRO,
Oh,
Operation.
yeah. Yeah.
There are all these different infiltration programs to control narratives and to infiltrate groups. And I experienced this when I was locked up. Um, it wasn't always the same, but like at the worst, inside the DC jail, a third of the inmates that were supposed to be patriots, a lot of them were informants or Antifa provocateurs, and they just tried to sabotage my case.
My
So
God.
you had people who were sending information to NPR to write hit pieces about me before my trial and sentencing, and it got cited at my sentencing. So the prosecutors were citing public reports from National Public Radio, publicly funded propaganda, which was getting its dirt on me from informants inside the jail that were So it's like, but I had a guy who was trying to get me to plot another Oklahoma City bombing. There's a guy named Tom Civic. He was ratting for the FBI. You had people in there who were trying to get us to, there's a guy named Jake Lang. He was trying to get me to join a militia to overthrow the government. You had a guy named what was it? John Mellis. This guy he's an atheist, which whatever, but he was joining Bible study groups so he could talk about assassinating politicians. It's like,
God Almighty.
we had the guy Zach Alam. He's the guy who broke the window where Ashley Babbitt got shot through the neck.
Yes.
And he was trying to pass himself off as MAGA. And we knew he was Antifa, and then he admitted it. He was like, "Yeah, I'm Antifa." And then he disappears. He gets extracted. And so people need to understand, like, I always call the DC jail, and we'll get into the jail, but like the DC jail itself was a psyop within a psyop. It was a
Yep.
controlled environment where, again, I think they wanted to radicalize us so that we would
Right.
turn into the stereotypical prison extremists that they could do
Well,
whatever they
I
wanted.
I would
Yeah,
imagine it's a similar theory when, you take someone who's young and inexperienced, some 17 or 18-year-old, and he didn't do anything wrong, but he was in the right place at the right time. And, prosecutors need a conviction rate. So he's held over the weekend and he doesn't get what he needs to eat or drink or his medication, and it's the heat and the cold and all the crap they dumped on you in that prison. And he finally just said, okay, all right, whatever, just let me out. What do I got to do to get out? Just
yeah.
sign this or say this. And
That's
then
That's the
I,
thing. There were individuals, for instance, who admitted that they were caught in drug conspiracies in 2020, and so that's why they were at the Capitol in 2021. And so it's like, well, I don't appreciate the fact that you set me up so you could save your own ass. But I mean, that's something people need to realize too, is that there's so many different levels. You probably had I mean, you did have undercover police like Metro or Capitol PD in plain clothes. You
right.
had agents, like actual agents from agencies that were there in plain clothes as well, who were probably there as handlers or operators. But then you also had CHSs or confidential human sources. You had basically rats or informants who were basically turned out as assets by the feds to get out of trouble for something else. There were so
Hmm.
many different. So when you look at the Whitmer thing, I think approximately a half or a third of those people turned out to be FBI informants.
Yeah, at
So,
least at least eight. And
right.
it's like a team of 15.
You have so like I mean I recall the like everybody was saying like there was a million people or whatever in DC or whatever, but like in terms of the grounds of Washington of the Capitol, let's say there were tens and tens of thousands. Let's say not even 100,000. Let's say it was just tens of thousands. How many like what percentage of those do you think might have been assets. There's no way to know until Trump gets in and they release the video. I believe it was Tom Massey was interviewing and he was questioning someone from the government. He was like, "You have this report, right, about all the confidential human sources?" And you're like, "Well, yeah, yeah."
Yeah,
And
it
you're
was
like, "Are
Christopher
you
Wray. It was that
are you
scumbag.
are you going to release this before the election?" Well, I don't think it's going to be. I don't. It's just like
Yeah, that was Christopher Wray, the current FBI director.
I think there was another one recently. I think it was
Was it Merrick Garland, the attorney general? Because they've all pretty much copped to, yeah,
yeah.
we kind of had exculpatory evidence, but I don't know. I was out that day, kind of crap going
I
on.
just, yeah, I mean, I'm in charge of one of the, I'm in charge of the most powerful country in the world's intelligence and law system. Da, 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 but yeah, I just don't know if I can
Yeah,
get this out to you.
and
But
then
yeah,
you think
that's
about
just
that piece of garbage, Mayorkas. He's an
yeah.
impeached highest security guy in the land. He's impeached and he's still running the Department of Homeland Security, which also had people on grounds because there was the alleged worry about, well, we may have some foreign operators part of
Yeah,
the insurrection. Remember that crap?
there were Ukrainians at the Capitol.
Yes.
It's funny, like the amount of, and like, okay, that's interesting. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, but there were a lot of foreigners at the Capitol. Like people from that clearly were from like the Five Eyes alliance countries.
Yep.
And so like, well, that's interesting.
Now
Again,
explain that to the audience, the Five Eyes. This is a whole group of countries, and you could elaborate on it, that have agreed to spy on all their people and share it.
Right. So you have the United States, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. So this
Yep.
is the Five Eyes, and like you just said, it's an intelligence sharing alliance between essentially you could just say like the Anglo world.
Yep.
So basically, yeah, that you have and then there's like the Nine Eyes. Like there's one with Israel, there's one with France. Like they just kind of it's like all
Yeah.
these globalist and spying organizations and stuff like that. There's so many overlapping interwoven stuff.
And it's ironic because somehow they can't keep planes out of buildings or borders closed, but they can track me
Well,
because
no,
you
no,
know,
you
or
don't
they can
understand.
track you.
They were on their radar. They just for some reason
Oh yeah,
they're
yeah.
always on the radar. If it's just they just can't get there in time. It's just how it is. But yeah, I mean there were Defense Intelligence Agency assets. They deployed CIA assets. So I mean when those reports come out finally when Trump gets in charge of the DOJ, I think we're going to see that it was a lot more infiltrated than we thought.
Now, do
Uh,
you think that's going to happen? Because I go back and forth. I don't want to make this about Trump's nominations at all, this segment, but I do want to have you back on, and I hope you'll come back on. We got a way to go today, ways to go, but I'm just saying sometimes his picks are like, yes, we're gonna get some truth coming out. And then sometimes it's like, what the hell were you thinking, Christy Nome, DHS? What the hell are you thinking? What's wrong with you? So that worries me sometimes because it was Mike Johnson who didn't deliver on the Jan 6 tapes, and it was the current FBI that won't deliver. And nobody's talking about Epstein lately. Did you notice that? Just as an aside, remember? I kept thinking that, when Trump gets in, we're going to hear everything. The stolen election, Epstein, Jan 6, Whitmer, the border. We're going to hear the Bidens in China. I haven't even mentioned the pardoning of Hunter yet, which I don't know how you're still sitting there and you don't want to go and just slap the hell out of that piece of garbage. I don't even know.
my pimp hand's not too strong these days. It's just not what it used to be. Like you are right that look, I try to stay as grounded as possible. I always say I take the world how it is, not how I want it to be. So I'm just sitting tight. A lot's going to probably happen still in the next month before he even takes office. So I'm just trying to stay grounded. Yeah, I've been able to do that the last 3 years. A lot of people have not, and so yeah, I just try to take things in strides. I'm not trying to get my hopes up, but I'm also trying to be optimistic. I do have faith that he is going to have the right people in the right places. And a lot of this too, I don't think if I'm okay, if I'm being honest, obviously, the fraud committee, the J6 committee in Congress, they destroyed a lot of evidence.
Yeah,
The Secret Service
that was their job.
lost everything.
That's
Well,
the
yeah,
committee's job to take it away from DOJ and to suck all the exculpatory evidence out of from the people they're targeting, and then they can come back just like the 9/11 Commission. Same difference. The
yeah.
9/11 Committee, the J6 Committee, the Benghazi Committee,
You
blah
know,
blah
it's
blah.
funny. They did that. They had those stupid hearings in DC. Now, keep in mind, we're in DC, and they're not giving us change of venue, right? So the potential jury pool is already prejudiced against us, and so they're putting these giant screens on the streets to play these stupid hearings, and so they're showing specifically the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, other defendants like Ryan Nichols. There's no way they were going to get a fair trial in DC because they went out of their way to name drop all these individuals. And then people like myself, they had rats who were putting NPR articles out there. You think people in DC are probably more prone to reading NPR than anybody
Right.
else in the country? It's just so they do these things intentionally to sabotage us. But
Well, that
so
was
this
also
guy,
a violation of your Fifth Amendment rights anyway, because you were denied a jury of your peers. One of the
right?
biggest violations there, our Constitution is abused every single day, and people just aren't aware of it enough because they're busy watching Law and Order or The View. But uh, you're supposed to get a jury of your peers. You're supposed to get, if you choose, a grand jury to decide. And by
Yeah,
keeping you away from that, and just keep labeling you, the domestic terrorist, insurrectionist, this, that, election denier, whatever they want to label you. But a jury of your peers would be a jury of people where you live. That's an
yeah.
actual jury of your peers. It's not where you commit the crime. That's not a jury of your peers, the alleged crime. A jury of your peers isn't a bunch of people that have been already programmed to hate anybody at January 6th. A jury of your peers would be, okay, he goes back to whatever county, New Jersey, because that's where he lives and works and grew up. That's a
Yeah.
jury of his peers. Nobody ever catches that. Is
And
it
just to
just
get
me? You're supposed to have a jury of your peers.
Well, that's the thing, and not for nothing too, but like change of venue would have been extremely important just because of the enormity of the situation.
Exactly.
My buddy Pete, Pete Schwartz, his lawyer made the argument that he should get a change of venue because even by the government's own claims, DC was the victim. So how could the victim also be the jury? And so like that was actually a really good argument, but it got shot down because he had a very partisan Judge Amit Mehta. And then he ended up getting 14 years because he fought an informant who was snitching on him.
My
So like
God.
they just planted people in there he wrote a 40-page report, a snitch report that he was sending to the court. This guy Brian Mock, we called him Agent Mock, and he puts it in his face. He's like, "This is for your own good," and like we're like, "Bro, like they're really ballsy now. Like they just got away with it so much." But the change of venue, yeah, a jury of our peers that was denied. They denied us fair and speedy trials. Forget
Oh
the jury.
God, yes.
The people need to understand too a lot of things that are in the Constitution need to be fleshed out with statutory law. So in DC, you have the Speedy Trial Act. And so, um, you have the right to a fair and speedy trial, but what that actually means needs to be fleshed out. So the Speedy Trial Act says you're supposed to get a trial within 70 days if you invoke
Yep.
that right. I was sitting in solitary for like a year. It actually took 16 months for me to finally go to trial. I was supposed to
God.
have one within 70 days if I asked for it, and I'm constantly pushing for my speedy trial. What they do is a dirty trick. They say that in the interest of justice, we're going to toll the speedy trial clock. So in other words, every day you spend waiting for trial, that's part of the speedy trial clock. Once you get to the certain, to the end of it, you're supposed to have your trial. So what they do is they just say, we're going to toll your time because it's in the interest of the public or it's in the interest of justice. So in other words, I don't want to give you a speedy trial. So none of the time you spent 16 months behind bars, none of that counted towards my speedy trial. And that's just what they did for J6. And they used COVID as an excuse. I was supposed to have my first trial in November of 21. I didn't have it till the spring of 22. Um, and so they just kept doing it. They used COVID as an excuse. They just use, well, there's a lot of J6 cases. The court's just swamped. Well, whose fault is that? You arrested people before you investigated them. That is your fault. That's not my fault. My constitutional rights don't rest on your convenience. You effed up. And that,
Yep.
unfortunately, that was just true for pretty much everything. I mean, I'll get into the conditions of the jail. We were denied every civil right you could possibly imagine. It was egregious. It was a horrible precedent. And as you know, like we have a common law system. So it's a great system, but unfortunately, a bad precedent will ripple through time for generations before it's corrected. It happened with abortion, happened with segregation, and COVID again. They kept us in solitary for a year because they were allowed to because of COVID. They just said, "Well, it's for your protection." Meanwhile, we're in solitary. The only people who can bring COVID into the jail are the guards. None of this stuff made sense, but because DC
Wow.
is worse than any blue state, they got away with it. Even after they stopped with the restrictions in DC, the jail still did it because they had carte blanche to do whatever they wanted. People need to understand, like bad precedent is that's a bad John. That's no good. You can't. It's not good. One
Wow.
one bad decision can affect millions of people in the long run.
What I want to do is because this is a big segment. I want to have another segment. I want to take a quick break, and then I want to get into, if you have time. I don't know what your time's like.
I'm all yours.
Okay, great. Because I know the audience wants to hear this. We need to hear this. It's fascinating. And so what I want to do is just take a quick break, and when we get back with Tim Hale, we're going to hear the arrest and the prison conditions and how uh, law-abiding citizens are treated by political enemies in this country. And we're back with our guest today, Tim Hale. Served 3 years for being at January 6th, pretty much doing nothing to deserve it. And you've been out a year now, sir.
Just under, yes, sir.
And how does that feel? Uh, you spent most of your life in a government role as far as the military, and then this dumpster fire occurs, and you're caught up in it with many others. There are many others. Let me ask you before we get back into that, how many Jan Sixers are still in jail now?
I'd say it's approximately 300.
So there's about 300 left. Now, were most of them denied bail, obviously,
I
or no?
I'm gonna say probably no. I think that a lot of them are just serving sentences. So I think that it's important for people to understand. I'm sure you've read Gulag Archipelago. The
Yes.
idea is that much like an archipelago of islands, the Gulag Archipelago is a series of jails and prisons scattered throughout the Soviet Union. So we called the jail in DC we were in the DC Gulag, but it's important to realize too, like not everybody was in there with us. A lot of people were out on bail or on house arrest pending the
Okay.
resolution of the cases. But there were also people who were held in pretrial detention too in other jails, like the Northern Neck, Virginia one. You had the prison in Lewisburg. And so throughout the country, a lot of J6 defendants have just been these nameless, faceless people who've just been in suspended animation. So,
And that's by design. That is by third world country design. There's groups that do that, dictatorships do that, and of course our CIA does that with black sites. There's
yeah.
nothing worse.
Hi, Poland. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
there
Exactly.
there's the saying is, the process is the punishment. A lot of people were held in those because like they had offered me plea deals. Um and they do that like they just want to coerce you into accepting responsibility for something you didn't do. And so people need to remember this too. There's the egregious way J6 defendants have been treated. There are a lot of new precedents they've set that are horrible, but there's also something to be said about how our federal criminal justice system works in general. We saw this with Steve Bannon or Peter Navarro or even before that. Like the truth is that having been in prison, I was in a low security prison when I finally went to the BOP, the Bureau of Prisons. There's a lot of people in there who just don't belong there. There are people who take deals
Mhm.
because it's their only way out. Our criminal justice system prioritizes convictions and not justice. So the people need to understand the amount of plea deals they get. Most people probably don't get convicted at trial. They take a
Well,
plea deal
it's 90
90
4
plus percent conviction rate.
94% do not get a trial.
Yeah.
So if that doesn't scream how this, and I don't, you know what, I always have this conversation with people that the system, if it was being run by ethical, moral people, God-fearing people, people that respect justice, people that follow the Constitution, it would work pretty well. It would work pretty well. It is the best on earth, but it's so corrupted. It's corrupted where Hunter Biden can do what he did, and he should have been in prison 10 years ago. And with the pen, he just got a 10-year, and now the Bidens are completely off the grid now because none of that can be used, blah, blah, blah. And yet, you said Bannon. I was thinking also Roger Stone, Carter Page, all of them, all of
Yeah.
them. None of those people should have seen prison. At worst, if you were going to play that game because it's nonviolent, half the time it's misdemeanor. And in the case of Trump, look at it was misdemeanors in the one case that they ran the statute of limitations.
The New York one, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
they turned a
reinstated
misdemeanor
them
into a felony. Yeah.
and they turn it into a felony. And so the justice system is not run by people that want justice now. It's run by people that want control, like you mentioned the gulag. That's why.
Yeah. And people, I mean, like, I do think that I do think the foundations of our system are ethical. The problem is that
Yes.
the people who run it are even outside the politics, because again, we just went through a series of politically, motivated prosecutions. But even then, like, it's important people to understand that no system is perfect. And so having gone through it, I have the hindsight to say they get a lot of these convictions because people don't have other options but to, and I'm not saying it's necessarily a class thing or a racial thing, but I do think that people need to understand it's impossible to fight the system. So when you take a plea deal, for instance, and this is why a lot of J6ers do, they don't put the government to its burden because they just in their minds they just can't go through the process because they don't have the finances, they don't have the time, they need to be with their families, they're looking
Hmm.
at separation. So when you take a plea deal, and I talked with Dinesh D'Souza about this as well because of his experience. This
Hmm.
is true.
Yeah,
When
I
you take a
forgot.
plea
He's
deal,
another one that served time for bull crap.
yeah, I interviewed him a little while ago, and he had he knows like these people when you go through it, it's like it's eye-opening because like you always know like I appreciate that Trump was for criminal justice reform. I did a year less than I had to because he signed the First Step Act, which gave you certain credits for taking classes and stuff in prison. And so like I think people generally are in favor of criminal justice reform, but that doesn't mean they really know how bad it is, how
Oh,
bad the
it's
system really is.
horrific. It's
So
horrific.
when you take a plea deal, you have a system of points. It's kind of like it's kind of like almost like a game, like the worst game possible. So you calculate the points you get for your sentencing based
Hmm.
on your charges, your history, your characteristics, all this stuff. And so you get a 3 point reduction. This is kind of arbitrary if you haven't been through it or if you don't have it in front of you. But if you take a plea deal, you get a 3 point reduction in your sentence calculation for acceptance of responsibility. But if you're like me and you went to trial and you lost, you get a 3 point enhancement for providing materially false testimony because you testified in your own defense, which is your constitutional right. But because
Wow.
you get found guilty, you're considered a liar. So now 3 point reduction versus 3 point enhancement, that's a 6 point difference. And that has a huge impact on what your final sentence time is. So people need to understand like people are taking plea deals because if they don't and they lose, they
Yeah.
can be screwed.
Yeah, they're
You
going to
can
lose their.
be
I know people personally. I know you do. Obviously, they've lost their family. They've lost their business, their reputation, their savings, their home, and there's still 300 more in prison. And the fact that every major news network and cable news network hasn't done jack about this, it just I can't even. This should be the fact that we have still 300 people that shouldn't be in prison
yeah.
and that
And
were framed.
over 1,500 who were charged too. Because and keep in mind, again, I'm lucky. I got out recently, but before that, I was in there for 3 years. I have friends who got out recently. They were also in there from the beginning as well. But then again, you have people. Maybe they didn't spend years in prison, but they spent years on house arrest, or they're just getting their GPS trackers taken off, or stuff like that. Like you said, people. There were defendants whose livelihoods, like these were small business owners. I always say, like J6ers are not. There are a couple of strange characters in J6, but for the most part, I always say the defendants are a fair cross section of American society. a third of us who were in the DC gulag were veterans.
Right.
Like it was blue
And
collar
family
work.
people, people with
Yeah.
kids and grandkids. And
I was lucky in that regard because I always say I was a bum. I didn't have a wife and I didn't have kids that I knew of. Like I don't like I you know what I'm
well,
saying?
that
Like
doesn't make you a bum.
well, yeah, like that doesn't like that wasn't weighing on me. But meanwhile,
Yeah,
yeah, a
yeah.
lot of these guys take these deals because they got to get back to their family. It's like,
I
oh
can't
well,
even imagine.
and
I cannot even, again,
that's why PFP was even founded because a lot of these guys were the breadwinners of their family, and the wives are taking two or three jobs or selling their blood, literally, so that they can support their kid. I mean, it's insane. And so, like, people need to understand. Um, I again, me being me, I put the government to its burden. A lot of us were just, very like hardcore. We're doing this. We're going to trial. You're not. I don't care
right.
about your narratives. I'm not signing your plea deal because when you do. And I'm not judging people who take plea deals because of what we just said, but when you sign a plea deal, you also sign a statement of facts. You're agreeing to a lot of lies, how they
Yeah.
frame it, and you also waive your right to appeal. So a lot of people, and I don't think it's gonna like I'm sure they'll still get pardoned, but in the grand scheme of things, if you sign an appeal, you waive. I'm sorry, if you sign a plea deal, you waive
Mhm.
your right to appeal, and you waive
Which
a lot
is,
of your
again,
rights.
it seems like, and this is not how the Constitution is written. This is how they added to it to control the population. I'm of the belief, and my audience knows I'm pretty radical in this sense. Most laws are designed to control people. They're not designed to keep us safe, to keep you safe, to keep people honest. They're designed to control people, and that's why the real bad criminals usually get away with it. Whether you're breaking into the country illegally, or you're doing horrible, violent things, or you're running a crap house or a crack house 6 blocks from here, nobody's even in your face. They're in the face of the people that they can control because they know we're afraid we're going to be law abiding. It's like the putting up a sign that says a gun free zone. We know better than to carry a gun in New Jersey in a gun free zone. But criminals are like, screw this, I'll do what I want, just like they do that in Washington, D.C.
It's
So,
funny. As an aside, real quick, it's funny. We were denied bail because we're all we're all extremists or whatever. But we're watching like they have a TV in the pod, in the wing of the jail that they're because we're all segregated. All the J6ers are just in one area, segregated away from the entire rest of the jail. Um, and so every night there would be like a news story, like local DC news, and it would just be like, yeah, this rapist, murderer, person who ran someone over, XYZ. Yeah, they just got bail, or they just got probation for something egregious. It's just like this is insane. It's like living in the Twilight Zone. But I
but
just point that out that
it's
it's
like
happening.
the Truman Show. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, that's an
That
oldie. But yeah,
yeah. Um, if Satan was running the Truman Show, that's what this is. That's what this is. And on it's emotional stress and everything else on top of it. Were you satisfied with your? Because I heard that you could only defend someone, you could only practice law if you're it's federally qualified or something. Didn't certain attorneys, you had to have certain training to do like a federal appeal versus a state appeal. So there was wasn't there a limited group of people that were willing to or skilled enough to defend you?
so yeah, so there's you would think a lawyer could just work anywhere, but no. I mean, and to be fair, part of our legal system is the fact that we're federal. It's a federal model, so the states have their own
Right.
common systems too. In fact, I think Louisiana has a civil code inherited from Napoleon, so that doesn't. But it's irrelevant. But um, yeah, so in order to operate in DC, you have to be admitted to the DC bar.
Boom.
So a lot of these lawyers, and not all bad lawyers, but like a lot of these guys, they had to like get co-signed by
Oh yeah, I
another.
was not. I would, and let me be clear. I wasn't indicating these lawyers are bad lawyers in any way. I was
Yeah,
saying that the system is set up
a lot
to
of people,
keep out.
I just threw that in there. A lot of
Yeah.
people assume that all these J6ers are getting screwed because their lawyers have had. It's like it's like
No.
our lawyers. A lot of these lawyers, they're like, I've never seen this shit before in my life. Like they're shocked, and they actually go in with a huge normalcy bias, thinking, well, I'll just argue the case. We'll make a deal. We'll work this out, and they're just like, whoa, these guys hate you.
Yeah.
And these aren't even far right people. Like it's the legal profession. Like a lot of these people are like just normie Democrats or just centrists or
Yep. They're
they're
just
just about the law. They're
trying to
about the
be a
law.
decent
Yeah,
lawyer and
they're
follow
about
the
the
rules.
law. They want to win, right?
Yeah.
That's their thing. They're like doctors. They're just like high octane. I want to win. This is and, and it's just like whoa. Like and a lot of the lawyers like they're familiar with some of the prosecutors even, and they're just like I I can't. They just won't work with us. It's crazy. Um, so a lot of lawyers came in from out of DC and they had to essentially if they basically had to have someone like co-sign on them like hey they can work off of my license and stuff like that I don't
Mhm.
like yeah, and then you have other people too like in my case my trial lawyer he was actually a JAG officer, but he also had a private practice too. So he was able to get the court to appoint himself to me and to my case, as long as I mean they consented to it. So I had a public defender at first. He seemed like a nice guy, but he screwed so much stuff up. This is partially also why a lot of us got denied bail. A lot of the initially a lot of us had public defenders who threw us under the bus, or they didn't take the case seriously, or they had a huge caseload and they just didn't focus on anything and they didn't argue anything. And so it for those who don't know, when you go into the DC system, first off, you're supposed to have extradition hearings when you're in a state and you're getting taken to feds. Most people didn't get that. And that's actually like states have to extradite people under the Constitution, but
Yep.
you're supposed to have hearings for that. And even the states, a lot of the states, like Florida, like a lot of these states, like they have statutes specifically laying this out, and people didn't get extradition hearings. So that's the first thing. People go in front of magistrates. So I went in front of a magistrate judge when I was first arrested. Magistrate judge is, works for the federal system, but they're local, right?
Right.
So this New Jersey magistrate judge, she hears my case, she gives me bond, she grants bond, and then immediately the government appeals it, so I have to stay in jail. I'm not released. And so for weeks, the marshals are bouncing me around the country, and this happens to everyone. They call it diesel therapy. And then you go on literally, it's Con Air for real, not the movie, but you go on
Yeah.
Con Air, the marshals throw you around, and then you have to have another bond hearing when you get to DC. So then you have your first bond hearing in front of the district judge. And then if you lose there, then you have to do a second bond hearing. They call it the reconsideration hearing. And then if you get denied that, then you have the appeal.
Mm.
So that takes you to the appellate court, and that's a three-judge panel. And it's the convoluted process, but it's like you have four rounds of getting told no, of go to hell. And that's unfortunately like that's just how it is.
Now,
Uh,
how were you treated um, by the guards and people that were part of the infrastructure? Was there bias there? Was there because I've heard different stories from different people. Um, I can't. It just seems like the level of corruption is just you can't even stomach it.
so here's the thing. Like I try not to embellish anything. I just try to be as again as like a history. I want to write a book about this like from as a objective and a position as possible. I'd mentioned that the COVID stuff was really used to screw with us for the first year,
Okay.
even after. Like even by the time I left in the fall of 2020, when I finally went to prison, they were still forcing people to wear masks in the jail. Um, so it really depends. So a lot of guards, and keep in mind as well, a lot of these guards are local. So they're believing what they put out about us. They also take J6 extremely personal because of where we are and what they believe about us. And so a lot of the guards, yeah, I'm gonna be perfectly straight with you. Most of them despised us and they literally treated us like domestic terrorists. And I told you they segregated us from the rest of the jail. They were actually treating us like we were domestic terrorists. In fact, one of the guards finally admitted, and this is where I'm being fair, some of them warmed up to us. After
Hmm.
a certain period of time, they realized that none of the stuff they said about us was true. Some of them were really cool. There was one guard in particular, he started coming in all the time because he was getting a lot of overtime and he could chill. And it's just let me just say, it's a funny distinction. When you first get to the jail and they put you in general population, the guards sit behind this bubble, this plastic bubble with a control panel, because they know that at any moment, these inmates in DC, this is how it is in DC, they could attack them, try to stab them. They have knives. They use human cocktails, which you can imagine what's in them. They squirt
Oh
them at
yeah.
them. Um, Meanwhile, in where we're at, they just sit at a mahogany desk and sleep, where everybody's just wandering around. There's no real threat to them. They feel perfectly, but at the same time, they still have that cognitive dissonance. So you have this one guard. I'm not going to
Wow.
name him, but because I do respect him, I'm not going to name him. But
Don't
he let
name him,
us
yeah,
out.
because he'll probably get the Bidens will be targeting him on his way out.
Right, he'll get indicted like Mayor Adams. But he was cool. Like he let us out, and so like again, we were on solitary. We were out of our cells 1 hour a day, so we could take a shower and maybe make a phone call, depending on how many people were lined up for the phone. But eventually, like he just started kind of letting us out pretty much all day. And so, with an exception, like in the middle of the day where they had to do count time, where they
Right.
checked where we were there. And so, like I don't want to embellish and say that, oh, we were getting beaten up every day and they maced us in our buttholes. It's like it's not like they're a lot of people make crap up, and
That
that's
is
the
true. That is true.
a lot of people make crap up,
No, I
but
appreciate I appreciate your candor, and it's interesting because we've been so pre-programmed with the media and with so much garbage on um, podcasting.
you
There are some very truthful and good podcasters out there, and there's just some people that, there. I'm sure there will be, just like there are in the military and law enforcement, there will be people from the January 6th community, and some of them will try to take advantage of it. And
it's been
you,
happening for years. I'm sorry to say, like
yeah,
it's actually been happening for years. You got people they want to be like social media influencers and superstars, and it's just
yep.
like most of us, again, we're like rotting, and nobody will listen to our cases. We're just suffering. And meanwhile, there's like a couple
And
people who are like seem like they're handpicked to be like the messiahs of J6.
yes.
And it's just like, how are you getting all these interviews, and why are you like, how are you rated? And it's just like, but yeah,
And
I mean,
where is the attention on the real issue, the issue that got you there?
right.
It's like if a bad cop builds his reputation on, I was the next Serpico. Well, what are you doing about what's happening now,
Yeah.
other than book a book tour? So
There's and then again I also I try to talk about the embellishment because it's an important thing to watch out for because there were serious issues. So here's the thing, like there was a lot of mistreatment from individual guards, but there was also an infrastructure that was there to put
protect you.
no, well, no. There was a boot on our ground. I guess boot on our ground. There was a boot on our neck, but it wasn't always from the individual guards who came in to watch the pod. So
Okay.
a lot of the guards who eventually were just chill, they still couldn't always protect us from the upper brass. And there was a deputy warden, for instance, who had on her social media how much she hated Trump, how much she hated Trump supporters.
Oh, I remember her.
Yeah, she got fired eventually, I think, but then it's institutional or it's systemic, I should say.
Yeah.
You know, I had mentioned that
She
they
shouldn't have gotten fired. She should have gotten fired and put in jail.
well, she's also should have been investigated. Like they should have
Yeah.
seriously investigated that because like how systemic was it? And so I told you we were segregated away. So they kept us in what was called CDF, the central, I'm sorry, the main jail is CDF, Central Detention Facility. We were
Okay.
housed in CTF, the Central Treatment Facility.
Okay.
So why is it treatment? Well, because it was a nut house. They kept us in an insane asylum. I always say that the DC jail is a mix of an insane asylum and an FBI field office. Because on the one hand, they kept us in a
Mm.
madhouse. On the other hand, you couldn't like trust a third of the people there because they were rats trying to mess your case up. But the guards admitted that good guard, I told you, a couple of them admitted they cleaned out that part of the jail for us weeks before January 6th because they knew we would be there. So on some level, this was intended, like I said, to be a psyop within a psyop. This was supposed to be a controlled environment for a myriad of reasons. But the real problems in the DC jail were not necessarily the guards. And so it was due process denial.
Hmm.
They would send in teams of officers to steal our evidence and our research that we worked on our cases. Guy named Jeff McKellop, the FBI came in, some guy on the outside of the jail tried to use his login information for an evidence site. Should have done it, but this dude screwed McKellop over, and they knew someone on the outside was trying to access the video. And so the FBI raided his cell. They took his evidence, they took his discovery, they took his research, they took all his paperwork. And it's just like they don't want anybody to find out what's going on for real. They don't want people to see the video, but they took people's evidence and discovery. They wouldn't let you see your lawyers. Before MTG was able to come into the jail, she did that in the fall of 21. She had been trying for months prior. So actually in the summer of 2021, she tried to come in and she was denied. The jail said, "Get out of here. We're not letting you in." They did the same thing to my lawyer that day. My lawyer, he was trying to come in and he was turned away. So I couldn't get a legal visit. I couldn't get legal visits during the week of my trial. It's like they were turning my own lawyer away when I was supposed to go to trial. Like I got almost no trial preparation. Uh, you weren't allowed religious services. Like you couldn't get communion. Um, Meanwhile, if you wanted to go to mosque and you were one of the regular inmates throughout the jail,
Mm.
that was totally cool. But if you wanted to go to church, you weren't allowed to. You were denied basic nutrition. And I'm going to say this: this is part of the embellishment thing I don't like. A lot of people just whine about how bad the food was. The first thing to remember is it's jail. Jail food is always terrible. Like Northern Neck, Virginia jail, that food was way worse than the DC jail, in my opinion. The problem with the DC jail's food wasn't that, oh, I didn't get any. It's the problem was that there was just no nutrition. There were no vegetables. They gave us like watered down pineapple slices. It was all carbs. There was no meat. So there was no nutrition. That would be, I would say again, I'm a pragmatist. It wouldn't be bad if you were just in jail for like a month. But
Right.
if you're in pretrial detention and denied bail and you're sitting without a speedy trial for a year or more, that has serious effects on your body and your health. Totally
No, it
understand.
also keeps you weak mentally and physically, and
Yeah,
that's how they want slaves and prisoners to
right.
be
If you want to
weak.
maintain your muscle or whatever, you're gonna have to buy mackerel. It's like not even good stuff. You can use the commissary to buy like the food for your food, and you could try to, maintain some lean muscle off of that. But it's just not. It just doesn't happen. Everybody got fat. They just became like human accordions, just But
My God.
you couldn't go outside. It was very rare that you actually got to have recreation time outside. So you got no sunlight. So everyone's skin was covered
So
up with
this
the.
is pretty much uh it is a form of abuse.
Yeah, I mean,
It
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 was
is a form of abuse.
it was psychological warfare. And I mentioned that guy Jeff. He was a CIA contractor. He had worked for he was in the military, did black ops. He was a special forces. And all this. He would constantly say, "Dude, this is just like SEER school. SEER school, like that's where they train you
Yeah.
in all that kind of stuff. It's like it's a torture tactic mentally. And they get even the solitary. Like solitary has been said repeatedly, like even for death row inmates to be put in 23 hours a day for years
Hmm.
is torture. It's like it's actually completely unacceptable. But again, because of COVID, they got to say, well, it's public health. And so again, this is just where like the slippery slope is not a fallacy. A slippery slope, especially in law, is extremely and it is something that should be extremely concerning. So yeah, the solitary thing. You're in your cell, and what do you have? You have a bed with a 1 inch thick mattress, and then you have a toilet, and then you're just staring at the wall for 23 hours a day for a year. So there's the mental torture there. You couldn't see your families. You couldn't get visitations. On top of just not being able to see your lawyer, you couldn't see your own family when they came to visit. The rest of the jail could. And here's another thing. This is the most. I'm going to say this is the most effed up thing. Um, you barely got any medical care, and I can get into that. When Marjorie Taylor Greene came into the jail, there was an old man, a 70-year-old Vietnam vet, Lonnie Kaufman. His hands and arms were purple.
Hmm.
They just were not giving. I had for over a year, I had a recurring ear infection. I was losing hearing in my ear. Blood and pus was coming out. They didn't care. But the worst part is that they offered you the COVID shot nonstop, and they said, "Hey, if you take the COVID shot, we'll give you civil rights. We'll let
My
you see your
God.
family. You can see your family. You can have a visit with your lawyer where you don't have to have like a glass window between the two of you. You can go to church if you get the COVID shot." And then people did get the shot. I didn't get it, but I'd say that maybe 4 or 5 people did. None of that happened. They just lied to get people to take the shot. No,
God almighty.
they didn't get any of that crap.
Well,
So.
they were lying to us in the free world to take the shot too.
Yeah.
But
Hey,
that
here's some money. Will you take the shot? It was just like
oh
they were.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just like, but I mean, they held us hostage. and then they held our rights hostage. I mean that's really what it is. I could get into all the again. I'm really about the legal system in itself because, like, again, the 14th Amendment, it was this amazing case, not an amazing case, like, ooh, it's so good, but I always mention the Yick Wo case. So if you study the 14th Amendment and its application, the Yick Wo case from the 1800s is a really good example. It's like a foundational example of how discrimination and how law is applied can be seen. And so they always say that if the law is applied with an evil eye and an uneven hand, then that is, that's discriminatory. And so, like, even
Right.
if laws are legitimate, like, let's say all those statutes I mentioned before weren't BS, even if they were okay, it's not just good enough that the statutes are legit. They have to be applied fairly too, right? So if it's for if you're treating a religious, political, racial, or whatever group differently under the law, it doesn't matter. Oh, like, okay, well, this group over here, they're Trump supporters. Let's hit them with the statue. If you wouldn't do the same thing for the left, then that's discriminatory. You're violating the Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment. And so, like, it's just funny because, like, yeah, everybody goes to BLM or Antifa. You had the BLM riots in DC right before J6, and they were doing the same thing with the MPD there. Nobody cared about that. You actually had environment. I mean, I'm sure you remember when Code Pink took over the Senate building
Oh
when
yeah.
the Brett
Yep.
Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. It's
They
like
were heroes. They were invited to speak at congressional events for Democrats.
they had environmental right. We were in the jail, and there were riots in DC where they were taking like bike racks and ramming cops, these environmental protesters, and they got tickets.
Yep.
So I mean, this was selective prosecution,
And
and
also,
that's not on the jail, but like that's just another part of the broader
oh no, no,
equation.
it's and you're firsthand, and I've heard this before, and to hear it again and again from people, it was cruel and unusual punishment. It was amazing to hear in 2024 an American citizen and a veteran, nonviolent misdemeanor, an alleged misdemeanor, right? Nonviolent, being treated the way an enemy of the state would be treated. In other words,
Well, it
it's
happens. This
just
happens in Guantanamo Bay. Everybody loses their mind.
yes, yes,
They put a caterpillar in his cell with him. Me like it's like, oh, that's torture. But meanwhile, you know, that somehow what happened in DC is not. And so, yeah, I mean, and again, if I'm a stickler, I could say, well, it's not cruel and unusual punishment because that only applies to people who are convicted. But it would still be a violation of due process because we were pretrial detainees. And this is another thing too. If you're a pretrial detainee, the standard is you're a totally free American, other than the fact that you can't leave the jail. So
yeah.
other than
So
the fact
you're
that
if and also you're supposed to be
we're still owed civil rights.
yeah, you're innocent until proven guilty, even if you're in cuffs up to the trial,
Yeah. And
supposedly.
it's the theory, right? But
Yeah.
January 6th put a lot of theories to the test. And
So a couple more things before we wrap today, and obviously you are a wealth of information, and I really would like to have you on again to do another segment. And I know I'm going to have your aunt on to talk more about patriotfreedomproject.com. But tell me about your arrest. Where, when did it happen? How did it go down? And because I just, this is so, it's not hard to believe. What's hard to believe about all of this, Tim, is that we can't get enough people to care. That's the hard part to believe. Like the media, we can't get them to care.
yeah,
Academia, they're programmed to hate you and me, and they're programmed. But the fact that we can't get people, the fact that there's not news cameras outside of the jail still boggles my mind. But if you were a rapper or, you were another celebrity of some kind, just it's still, and I mention it to people and they don't even care. And that just blows me away. I guess it needs to happen to everybody before we understand how effed up the government is.
I hope it doesn't get to that point. Yeah,
Me too.
it's yeah, I can't blame people for not being outraged about things they don't know. And so, like,
True.
I still, now that I'm out, and I came out swinging, and so, like, I've built kind of a following on X, but it's just like people just don't know. The average person has no idea, like even 20% of the whole story, and they're genuinely like their hearts are in the right places, but they'll say stuff to me. I'm like, that hasn't been true for 2.5 years. I don't know, so it's just like it's
And
just
that's a great point. That's a great point. And I do agree with you uh, completely on the fact that people have lives and they've been conditioned and pre-programmed to only accept information. Like I look at the garbage that NPR and PBS spews about
yeah.
January Sixers, and I watch a lot of news and a lot of stuff for research. I'm pretty well researched, and the narratives really haven't changed in the media. So let me
No,
redirect all my hate back to where it should be, the media.
you don't hate them enough. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because, you have all these panels and all these different shows and then I heard another idiot who I don't talk to anymore, that's in 24-hour news, and I said, "Why aren't you guys on this Jan 6 thing? I mean, this is a big deal." "Well, how much time do you think we have?" I'm like,
They,
"You
they
got
had a lot.
24 hours a day."
They had a lot of time to talk about it 24 hours a day
That's what I'm
whenever they
saying.
wanted. Yeah, it's
I mean,
but
they're
it's
the
Operation Mockingbird. It's just their control
exactly.
operations. I mean, yeah. So I mean, I blame the state and the media. I
Yeah.
don't blame people who don't know. But back to your original
Yeah,
question.
where were you when they just rolled up and arrested you, and were you shocked when
Yeah,
it happened?
well, I kind of like again because of the things I was hearing and because of some things that there are details to a lot of our cases where it's like, were we being watched the whole time, and how far were they planning to set us up, and were they
Hmm.
setting individuals up as well? I think that there's some evidence to suggest that I was being followed by NCIS. I can't prove it yet, but
And why
so
would that be?
because as I said, I worked as a contractor for the Navy,
Okay.
and so I was the union rep, and I was causing a lot of problems for the management for this contracting
But
company.
nothing illegal.
No, I was just doing my job.
I
So
see. Okay.
there was an incentive. Again, I'm a labor guy. And I don't think that that's compatible with an America First agenda. I think it used to be that they were one and the same. I actually was constantly at war with the management who was violating labor laws, USERA laws, which are the ones that protect they protect military reservists and National Guard, their
Hmm.
employment. And so I was building a case against my employer. And I was working with Congressman Chris Smith's office, who totally abandoned me after I was arrested. And then he voted for the anti-Trump committee hearings. He's a scumbag. Chris Smith's terrible.
So many are.
But
Anyway.
so my employer knew I went to the Capitol. It wasn't a secret. I was supposed to go with friends from work, and they ended up bailing. And I have questions about that now too. But so my employer tipped off the feds that I was there. So NCIS, and they lied in a lot of the original charging documents. Everything they said about me was a lie, and I was able to prove it. It just took years to get my hands on the original stuff. The feds came to my house looking for me to talk to me, and they ended up finding my roommate. My roommate was a Navy seaman, and his contract was coming up. So he was
Hmm.
about to leave the Navy and head back home. So they set him up to wear a wire to try to incriminate me and get me to say stuff about January 6th. So a week after J6, he's coming up to me when I'm like I'm in a slump. I'm drinking, like I'm just kind of waiting. But I trust my friend that I've lived with for 3 years. This Jamaican dude. I thought, I don't even blame him. I kind of think he was coerced. But they tried to suggest that my roommate went to them at the day after January 6th to rat me out. But it turned out they didn't even talk to him until the 12th. So actually, they lied so that they could cover their asses. And so, yeah, I think that it was a complete setup, and I think they coerced my roommate. And so, if you look at the documents, that seems to be what it was. So they try to get my roommate to get me to say, and again, I'm a troll, so I say a bunch of incendiary nonsense. I'm drinking. I'm fucking around with my friend, who, by the way, he's left of center, which I never
Okay.
had an issue with. I never had an issue with someone
All
having a
right.
different opinion.
Let's go back to incendiary things because you used the word incendiary,
Yeah.
and I am a huge free speech guy. And I think as long as, and I do this all the time, as long as I'm not breaking the law, I don't really care that, you've given me a list of things I can't say about COVID and I can't say about Israel and I can't say about this. And I don't really care. Now, one thing I'm not going to do is ever threaten violence because that is a crime.
Yeah.
or harm. So what did you mean by incendiary? Because there's got to be at least one liberal dingbat listening to this saying, "Well, he had it coming. He shouldn't have done that online." So what was it?
So as the background here, my friend is a BLM guy. Like he's very into burn it all down, no justice, no peace, and all that. So, and I have
Was this the
recorded.
friend that ratted you out?
He is. So like
Okay.
we had done podcasts together. I had made satirical characters with him helping me. He did a lot of my tech stuff. And so like there was an established history with us where he would say off the wall stuff, I would say off the wall stuff. And
Okay.
because he was left of center, he would constantly and he would always I guess endorse civil war or sectarian conflict and stuff like that. And I
Okay.
would always be the straight man and be like, yeah, I don't think that's going to help the black community. I don't think that's going to blah 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 blah. So this
So it
time
was like shtick.
the roles are reversed. I'm drinking. I'm like, oh yeah, I think there's going to be a civil war. And he's like, you think there's going to be a civil war? I'm like, oh yeah, totally. And so he's wearing the wire, and they take the
Okay.
transcripts and they cut off the part at the end where I'm like, by the way, I don't actually want a civil war. I don't actually want people dying in the streets. They cut that out so they could say that I was plotting a civil war so they could deny me bond. And even the judge, initially, she's just like, this is nonsense. This isn't anything. The government trusts him. He has a secret security clearance. He's been working on a Navy. I literally was responsible for protecting the ammunition that restocked the warships for the Navy. Um, and so, but once I get to the district level, that just doesn't the other half of this just never gets seen. And so
Right.
from that point forward, they go out of their way to try to portray me as the next Timothy McVeigh. I told you I was a comedian. I did satirical videos where I know this is the only thing you're going to see about me if you Google my name, but they tried to say that I was a neo-Nazi because I did satirical videos where I was in a Hitler costume pretending to be a supporter of Governor Phil Murphy when I was talking about his COVID lockdowns. Like I don't know if you've been on YouTube, you see like people do reaction videos to like movie clips or things like
Oh yeah.
that.
Yep.
I
Yep.
was doing the reaction to Tucker Carlson's interview with Governor Murphy.
I think I saw that.
Yeah, he's like, so I understand COVID's bad, but what about the Constitution? And Governor Murphy's like, oh, Tucker, that's above my pay grade. And I'm dressed like Hitler. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Emergency powers. Why would you ever question authority?
I think I saw that.
And so this is
Oh, man.
totally this is a year before J6, by the way. This is old content. This is and
So
so
you're on their radar,
yeah.
probably because a
Yeah,
lot of us ended up on their radar
yeah.
when MAGA kicked off.
Yeah, and
I
so
mean,
I
I
would
was probably on their radar when I endorsed Trump in 2015 as a media guy. Who's this guy,
I mean I think that's definitely the case with a lot of the J6 people. I think that more than likely NCIS was probably watching me for probably years because the investigating officer who held my case, and this is why I said I think they might have been following me. The NCIS officer, this guy actually says, and this is different than most statements of facts you'll see in J6 cases. You'll usually see, I'm investigating FBI agent such and such. It's my job to do this or that. But in his statement of facts, he says, I was working on January 6th. I was on duty on January 6th. I'm with NCIS. Da, 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 da.
Okay.
And there were looking back on it, there were individuals who came up to me and asked me if I was in the military when I was at the Capitol, and I found that very odd. I'm like, how would you know that? And I'm like, is it because of my haircut? Like what? And then they just disappear. And I wouldn't be surprised if, and they showed video at my trial to try to identify me, and it was extremely pixelated. And I think they did something similar with the Kyle Rittenhouse case, where there might have been law enforcement in the area, but they didn't want people to know that, so they pixelated some of the video. That's what I had heard. And so I'm
And when
like,
you're
well,
talking about pixelating, you're talking about other people around you
yeah, like
to
like
to make sure
the
that
video, the quality of the video has been intentionally downgraded so
right.
that you can kind of make out that it's me, but pretty much everything around is just like
So
garbled.
people can't say, "Wait a minute, isn't that agent so and so? Wasn't he at our Christmas party?"
Right. And so I think that there was a lot of that. And so this officer, he actually says in some of the NCIS reports that I was finally able to get, he was very familiar with me. He had known me for years. I actually was responsible for scanning his ID and for letting him on the base for quite a while. Like he would see me multiple times a week. I
Wow.
didn't know this guy personally, but he knew me. So I'm not saying it's definitive, but I think that for a lot of J6 defendants, we were, as you said, we were on the radar because they knew that they could try to turn us into patsies, frame a narrative. And again, in my case, there were people trying to set me up as the next Timothy McVeigh in the jail. They tried to get me to, plot it, an Oklahoma City bombing type event, and I never fell for it. But this was nonstop. It was like Groundhog's Day. It was like every day, it's just another script. And so, I just so yeah, that's what happened with me. I ended up getting picked up a week after January 6th on the 15th, and this was the day after my roommate wore the wire. And so I'm leaving that night to go to the pet store to get food for my fish, which were all dead, by the way. And so I get pulled over with a dozen like SWAT vehicles, blacked out vehicles, FBI, NCIS. I'm like, here we go, because I'm living on the base I work at. I have base housing. So I'm on an off ramp to get off the base. They get me right before I get off the ramp. So I'm still on the base and
Uh,
they run up to the vehicle point. As soon as they saw the lights behind me, I'm like, here we go. It's happening. I thought at first it was a fire truck going out to help the local town, but then I'm like, no, there's way too many lights. Fuck. Pardon me. This is happening. It's going down right
and what
now.
base? What base was this?
This was Naval Weapons Station Earl in Central Jersey. And which is
Oh,
funny,
okay.
there are only two, like there were two major facilities. One is Earl and the other is Fort Dix, which is also where I went to prison and it's also where I worked for 12 years. So that was kind of convenient. But it happened like that. They came at it like I'm just like I turned my truck up, put my keys up. I'm like, here we go. I'm not resisting at all. They're pointing guns. I was just like, I'm coming out, I'm coming out, and they dragged me to the ground so hard, like they tore flesh off my shins, and I didn't even realize it at the time because of the adrenaline, I guess. But when I'm finally being taken to jail, I realized my legs are covered in blood, like it's stained my jeans. It's just like it was totally excessive because, as you said, I was not charged with violence. The worst I did was talk crap. And it's like when you actually watch the CCTV, you realize I would half the things they accused me of saying in the recordings were clearly embellished and just made up for the sake of the story.
Right.
Like there was part of it where they tried to deny me bail because they said that oh, defendant Hale, he said that someone threw a flagpole like a javelin and he picked it up and took it with him. It's like if you watch the CCTV, first off, this isn't a Mel Gibson movie. There was no flagpole thrown like a javelin. Some dude fell over because there was a crowd behind him and he dropped the flag and I picked it up. It's comical because they had the CCTV and they knew none of this stuff was true. If you
And that's
watch the
probably why they're
CCTV,
not releasing a lot of this, right?
of course, because again, this all goes back to the original point. There was violence on January 6th. A lot of it was provoked. People were defending themselves, they were protecting third parties, and some people were just incited by provocateurs who were
And also, there were some knuckleheads.
yeah, and some
There
people
were
got out
some
of hand.
idiots.
There were
Yeah.
people who got out of hand, and there were
Yep.
Antifa. There was a guy named Landon Copeland. He actually, to his credit, he confessed he was Antifa, and he said that there were hundreds of Antifa who were there. It doesn't mean everyone who was, and I'm not blaming J6 on Antifa. Some people just want to blame Antifa. Some people just want to blame the cops. Almost nobody talks about the actual feds. It was like a chain conspiracy. It was like a hub and spoke. There were all these moving parts,
Yep.
but
And the whole point was to get a net
yeah,
over all
it was
these people that
a
are,
lobster trap. Yeah, it
yeah,
was a
that are
lobster
exercising free speech that makes people uncomfortable,
like
that would vote.
COINTELPRO. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
exactly. Voting for a man that makes people uncomfortable, supporting ideologies like crazy stuff like Christianity and the Second Amendment that make people uncomfortable. And it worked. And it
And
worked.
but then when you look inside the building, you got little old ladies walking through velvet
Yeah.
rope like it's a museum. And that's honestly what it was. Like I could show you CCTV. I'm happy to do it actually. I have some. It's actually hilarious because I'm wandering around. I walk in the Capitol. The doors are open. I walk through, I go to the left. I walk through a hallway. I disappear. I come back the other direction. I'm like, because I don't know where I'm going. I don't even know where I am.
Right.
I go to the left and then I go back to the right. I wind up in an area called the Crypt. It's this circular room with a bunch of statues. Very beautiful.
I know
Um,
exactly where it is. I've been there. I've done stories there. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like people were putting like MAGA hats on statues, and it was hilarious. I'm not gonna pretend it wasn't. Somebody put a Trump flag in a statue's hand, and I saw that. And I'm like, oh damn, I'm taking a selfie with it, and it's just like it wasn't even a riot at that point. At that
No.
point, people were wandering around. I went into an area called the Capitol Visitor Center. I'm literally on video dancing. like it just wasn't what they said. And of course, they don't want you to see most of the video from the inside. Like you had mentioned, people were exonerated. The Q shaman dude, which a lot of people have their own thoughts about that guy, but like he was given a guided tour by the Capitol Police. He was
Yeah.
brought into the Senate building, into the
And if you
Senate.
heard the audio, which you have, I'm sure, you hear
Yeah,
the audio, and he said he thanked them. He said, I
yeah.
really appreciate you not getting in our face, letting us get the photo ops. I promised we wouldn't break anything, and we're not going to. And
There
then,
was
and the cop said, no problem. And one cop even gave him like a little thumbs up.
Yeah, there were
And
people. There's video of I know guys who were fist bumping the cops, and they're like, "Hey, man, we got no problem with you," da, 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 and they still got raided. And it's just garbage. It's absolute garbage. There's so much, and there's video that is not provided to a lot of us, like exculpatory video. I distinctly remembered that when I was leaving the building, me and this girl and a cowgirl in a cowboy hat, we were yelling, "Hey, make sure you don't break stuff like Antifa or BLM." And I found the video years later. It's like, what the hell? And it's like I had said this, and there was never any credence given to it. Like there just wasn't this possibility. Um,
I actually have a video of and I actually played it on it's funny, I played it on a radio station that I was on, and someone who out of the blue was like, "Where did you get that?" I said, "I really can't say." "Well, why can't you say?" I just can't say where I got it, but what it is, it's a video from a MAGA person, and they were walking in this crowd, and this guy had a knife, and it was a folder, which is like the last thing you want to have in DC, like a Spyderco or any type of folder or whatever. And he dropped it. And the one MAGA guy goes, "What the F are you doing? What do you mean? You brought a knife? What are you, an idiot? We're not armed. You're not, this is not why we're here." He's like ripping the other guy. And it was obvious the one guy was a plant.
yeah. Well,
Who the hell would go into the Capitol with a gun or a knife
there's an
with a
interesting case.
brain?
There's an interesting case. It's the Munchell case where a guy and his mother, I guess they had like a stun gun or whatever, but they put it away in like a backpack or whatever because they didn't want to go in there with a weapon because they thought that they would get in trouble. And then, it's just like again, like all these people, it's just about a narrative. Like that part never really gets examined. Yeah, they and keep in mind as well, there are actual weapons, and then there's just like that's a tool, right? Like so, like I believe in the shaman dude, they tried to charge him with having a dangerous or deadly weapon because there was like a pointed tip on his flagpole.
I remember
And
that.
then and keep in mind also, and I want to be again as objective as I can be. I always try to play devil's advocate here. Some people had things like body armor and mace and stuff like that, which are obviously not guns and weapons of war or whatever. But you might question, like, well, why do you have that stuff? And so I went to again, I was just expecting a protest on DC or on January 6th at worst. I was really expecting a speech. I wasn't even expecting a protest.
Mhm.
But the month before, people were in DC for that Stop the Steal rally. And people don't realize, like, it was a Proud Boy. I think it was a Proud Boy. Someone was stabbed by an Antifa member. And
I
so,
remember that.
yeah, and that was like the whole day was boring, and then I heard at the end of it. That's why I definitely wasn't expecting J6 to go down the way it was, because for the most part, I expected nothing to really happen, just like the last events. So,
Right.
but yeah, like, I don't want to say like okay again I wore a suit and tie, I tried to look that's how I wanted to show up, but I understand why some people went there kind of dressed all crazy or whatever, or because they might have had mace, which is less than lethal.
Right, right.
I
Well, I
think a
know
lot of
there
people
are there are restrictions in government buildings on things like mace, because
sure.
depending on the strength, it is a weapon. I get that.
Yeah, and
Um,
I'm not even defending bringing this stuff in the building. I'm
well,
just
no,
saying
I'm
there's
just
a lot of
saying,
there was build up to this that people
right.
don't really think about. Like again, like patsies, people who are like again, like that old man Lonnie Kaufman, 70-year-old Vietnam vet. He's from the deep South.
Hmm.
He comes to DC. He didn't do anything wrong at the Capitol. He was kept in the gulag because he had firearms in his truck. He's an old man from the deep South. He's 70 years old, and he
Yep.
left the gun in his truck.
And
And
that's the
because of
type
that,
That's the
Yeah.
type of guy they use to feed the narrative. These people came from all over the country with guns, planning to overtake. I'm sure that the 70-year-old Vietnam vet would know how to take over the government as
Yeah.
an insurrectionist. I don't think he would leave it in his truck. But the other thing, I don't have a problem with people wearing full kit or anything that's protective or defensive. I never
Yeah.
have because I've been to those rallies before, not at January 6th. I'm saying, and it's so interesting. I was going to go to January 6th. It was on my docket. I've been to this. I went to the State of the Union address.
Yeah.
I was a big proponent of the president. I had met the president. I did the rally circuit in Pennsylvania. I went to the inauguration, as told you. And at the last minute, I just said, something doesn't smell right about this. I'd rather just cover it live. I'd rather
Yeah.
just have, because I knew a bunch of people. I had been invited by people in Pennsylvania being very active in this movement and support of Trump and etc. And a bunch of people from Central PA invited me. There was invites on buses. There were groups to go, just like individual, like a handful of us. And I said, just do me a favor, just call in. I'm going to give you the hotline number. Call into the studio and tell me what's happening. And that's what happened. We had people calling throughout the day talking about, when the Antifa people showed up, in like those rented minibus type things where they hold like 12 or 15 people, and they all got out, and some of them had backpacks with red shirts and red hats in them. I'm sure you saw the video after that horrific murder of Ashley Babbitt by that gutless piece of garbage, Michael Bird, who got a promotion and a reward. That there was a guy on the stairwell in frame, and
Yeah.
he was looking around changing his clothes.
That's Zach Alam. That's Zach Alam. He's an Antifa member. He
There
was in the
you
jail
go.
with them.
And
Yeah.
and
He
and I
changed
could
clothes before that too. And inside the crypt, I have CCTV. He's laughing. He's rolling around on the ground.
yes,
He's talking
yeah.
to people, and he changed his clothes right in front of the cops like a
And
second
here
time.
and here we are talking about this, in December of 24, and there are people in the media that have never heard this or they just don't want to hear it and they won't cover it.
Yeah.
And I I'm sure you had family members and friends. I can't even imagine the whole prison, the toll that takes. But I just started writing people off because by the time, just like the stolen election, but the January 6th, being someone that's in the media that knew a lot of what happened, not what you've just told me. A lot of this is new, fascinating information. But
Yeah.
trying to discuss it with people in the media, I just lost so much respect for some people that were colleagues of mine. And I would say, we should really do. Oh, you don't buy all that Jan 6 crap, do you, Ken? Like the gulag and all that. And I realized you're just a brainwashed idiot. I had no idea I was working with brainwashed idiots.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny. Like honestly, I think the majority of them never saw any benefit in covering it. And then I keep in mind also, I think it became oversaturated. You have guys like that, was it, Scott McFarlane. There's like a handful who are just focused on J6 stuff. That's like they've built their career off it now.
Yep.
There was one guy from NPR. His name was Dreisbach or something like that. He's just this little swarmy parasite. He still writes hit pieces about me, and I've already done my sentence. Like
Wow.
the NPR is obsessed with me. So, but I think like there's a handful of people who want to talk about J6, but just so they can keep promoting the narrative. The rest of them they see no benefit in it because it's not. I think it's
Right.
oversaturated. But yeah, getting an honest journalist to talk about January 6th, first you'd have to get a journalist who's honest in the first place, and that's rare, unfortunately.
Yes.
Like I
Yep.
said, Operation Mockingbird, it is what it is.
Yep. Now, some guy I still have a lot of respect for. I don't know if you know much about him, John Stossel.
John Stockton, was he the libertarian from Fox News?
ABC. He was ABC, and I think he did jump to Fox News.
Yeah, he had like
Uh,
a kind of like the not Freddie Mercury mustache, but like kind of something similar. He had like a kind of I think I know who you're talking about. He had like a dark mustache. He would always do he would talk about like government inefficiency and stuff like
oh yeah,
that. I
yeah,
think
yeah.
like
He's
man
like,
on
I
the
think he's in his 70s now. I'm not sure. He's been around a long time, but he's
okay.
always been a truth teller.
Yeah.
Uh, but what I want to do, we have to wrap up because this is going to be the second segment of this,
Okay.
and I can't wait to get it out on my platforms and see how quickly it gets strikes on YouTube or gets kicked off Facebook. But don't worry, it's gonna be on Rumble, it's gonna be on Truth, etc. Now, you said you have a channel on Twitter,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah, I have a
do you
channel.
do broadcasting on there or anything or?
I probably should. No, I mostly just troll people that I know are feds, but like it.
So after 3 years in jail, you've come out and you're even a better troll.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
I haven't even reached my final form. It's like my power level is maximum.
Maybe I'm headed in that direction. My career just keeps plummeting. Now I'm just, I'm in a house studio in Pennsylvania. Maybe who knows? Maybe I could be at a Troll Max in a couple
Join,
years.
join the dark side. Let the hate flow through you.
Oh my God. We got to do something though. We should team up and do something like maybe on your do you have the what is it called? Twitter space on your.
Yeah, I've done a few. I actually just did one of those last night. It was like a big January 6th panel talking about the whole pardon concept or
Oh
whatever.
wow.
Yeah, that was like a 5 hour stream, I think.
Holy moly. But
Yeah,
I would love to do because I've got that whatever level of Twitter that is where I can do the live stuff.
yeah.
Well, in closing, what do you anticipate uh, with the pardon? Do you think you and some of these other people will be pardoned? And now, if you get a pardon now, that means that this is taken off your record, right?
It depends on what it is. Like there are different kinds of pardons. A pardon of innocence, I believe, would vacate the not just the like a pardon is generally just like a you're forgiven for your crime, but I think there are certain ways to pardon someone to where they're considered innocent of the crime, and so
Okay,
it's essentially a clean slate, so to
that's
speak.
what you would want, I would imagine.
I think I mean most people should want that. I would but the thing is like I mean he came out yesterday. He did an interview, I think, and he said like they're going to
Trump,
look at it on a case by case basis.
you Trump,
Um,
you're talking about?
yeah,
Yeah,
President
okay.
Trump, and so a lot of people want him to do a blanket pardon. I don't agree with that personally because there are people like Ray Epps, like Zach Alam, the Antifa guy. They're all
I think Ray Epps is a sellout. I don't know. What do you think of Ray Epps?
I think he was probably a federal asset. I think he was probably a CHS of some sort, probably an organizer. I'm not going to say he's a Fed in the sense, like Fed, we use Fed loosely, and I'm guilty of it too. I don't think he was an agent. I think that more than likely he was a contractor for like DHS, or he might have been some sort of confidential human source
And he
who
was
was
being run by the people that wanted to frame up a lot of these people.
yeah, and so like I think he was an operator. Like he clearly is engaged in crowd control at certain points. He's definitely moving throughout the crowd. There's video, a lot of good. Again, you should look at Free State Will on X. It's defendant Will Pope. He's the only pro se defendant who, well, he beat the government. He's outed a lot of feds that were in the crowd, and so he's actually tracked Ray Epps throughout basically all of DC. He's found CCTV cameras and showed
Wow.
talking to countless people throughout the crowds, telling them to go to the Capitol. And so, it's
And yet
suspicious.
he walks.
Yeah, because he went uncharged for years while people are calling him a Fed, and then eventually, like, it just gets to this point where we're like, okay, we'll give him one misdemeanor and we'll give him probation. And like it's that sort of thing. It's kind of like the gun guy where they wait 3 years, and it's just like I've never seen another defendant I never seen the government apologize to a defendant for conspiracy theories about them. So like the prosecution was like, "Oh, he's been treated so unfairly." The judge is like, "I'm so sorry you've been through this, Mr. Reps." Nobody like, "Oh, this poor baby, he's being accused of being a and then there's no penalty." Meanwhile, he actually was involved in assaults. There was this giant Trump sign, and anybody who put their hand on it when it was being used to push into cops, anyone who put their hand on it was charged with an assault. Ray Epps was never charged with an assault, even though he was actively shoving it into cops. So he engaged in felonious activity, and he never got charged for it. I think it's very clear that he's protected in some way. I don't know to the extent, but this is the thing, man, is that I want the truth to come out. I don't want anybody rotting in prison, so I hope that they commute people's exorbitant sentences.
True.
I know the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, they got railroaded for a narrative. A lot of good people rotting behind bars and they don't deserve to be there. My buddy Pete, his parents are senior citizens. By the time he got a 14-year sentence, like I
God
said,
almighty.
for fighting a snitch in jail. So I mean, his parents could pass away before he gets out. I want these people out before I even think about pardons. I want these people out of the jails and prisons they're rotting in, and then I want them to stop the prosecutions and stop kicking people's doors in. That's my first priority. The pardons would be nice, but I want my friends out of the gulag. That's my first concern.
And obviously, people can go to patriotfreedomproject.com for more information, right?
They can
And
go to
is
patriotfreedomproject.com, and hopefully this will be the last Christmas that anyone is dealing with any of these burdens. But Christmas is coming up. If anybody has it
Mhm.
in their heart and they want to donate so that parents can, give their kids Christmas, it would be greatly appreciated. There's a lot of families who benefit from this foundation. Hundreds of defendants and their families have been helped. So if anybody wants to help, go to patriotfreedomproject.com. It's endorsed by President Trump. It's endorsed by JD Vance. And so, yeah, I mean, what I was dealing with in the jail is I saw these dudes and how they were suffering. My Aunt Cindy, she saw how the families were suffering. She built the groundwork for the foundation as a support group, and now they help with legal fees. They help families pay their bills. It's very
excellent.
important. So yeah, thank you for the shout out. PatriotFreedomProject.com. Hopefully, this is the last year where we're needed.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
I'm looking forward to having Cynthia uh, on the show for December, sometime in December. I know she's involved with helping families during the holidays, and it's really been a pleasure and an honor to have you on because um, just your honesty and the fact that you fought it and you lost because it was a cheat, but you did your 3 years and you come out and
I won in the long run, I think. I won in the long run. I got to get the story out. I played the long game. I came out
yep.
swinging. I won in the Supreme Court, and I we all have to bear our cross, and I'm glad I did.
Well,
Yeah,
it's great having you on. I hope you're going to come back on the report
I would love to.
and have a Merry Christmas if I don't talk to you before then.
And a happy new year. Absolutely.
He has a sense of humor after all that.
Don't let your memes be dreams. Meme magic is real. Thank you so much for having me on.